When you hear the word Titanic, what's the first thing you think of? For most of us, it's probably the blockbuster 1997 movie. And hey, it's a classic. But the real story of the Titanic, well, it's not just a romance. It's an absolutely fascinating scientific story about how the unthinkable actually happened. And that quote really gets to the heart of it. The sinking wasn't just some freak accident. It was a cascade of failures, a perfect storm of bad decisions, bad materials, and just plain bad luck that pretty much doomed the ship before it ever left the port. So let's dive into this.
So, the big question is, how did the largest, most luxurious ship in the entire world, this incredible marvel of engineering, sink on its very first trip across the ocean? We're going to investigate the chain of events that led to one of the most famous disasters in all of history.
Okay, so let's talk about this whole unsinkable thing. That was its big selling point. The design was actually pretty clever. It had 16 watertight compartments. The idea was if you got a hole in the hull, no big deal. You could just seal off the damaged parts. The ship was literally built to stay afloat, even if 4 of these compartments were totally flooded. In theory, it was a brilliant system.
But here's the thing. The blueprint for disaster was drawn up long before the ship ever touched water. We're going to look at the critical flaws that were built right into its frame, turning this masterpiece into a tragedy just waiting to happen.
What's wild here is how 3 separate decisions, made for what seemed like good reasons at the time, mostly aesthetics and convenience, ended up fatally compromising the ship's safety. First up, to make room for that big, beautiful grand staircase you see in the movie, they built the watertight walls too low. Second, the machines that put in the strong steel rivets couldn't quite fit into the curved part of the bow. So what do? They used weaker iron rivets instead. And third, and this one is a real shocker, to make the decks look more spacious and less cluttered, the owner actually cut the number of lifeboats way down. And this chart just puts that lifeboat decision into stark relief. You've got 2,223 people on the ship, but the lifeboats, they only had room for 1,178. That's just about half. Let that sink in for a second. Even if the evacuation went perfectly, from the moment that ship set sail, almost half the people on board had absolutely no chance of survival. So you have to be asking, how on earth was that legal? Well, believe it or not, the maritime laws back then were completely out of date. The number of lifeboats you needed was based on the ship's weight, not the number of people on it. The crazy thing is, the Titanic actually had more lifeboats than the law required. It's a terrifying thought. So you've got this deeply flawed ship setting sail. But the problems didn't stop there. The voyage itself was just one bad omen after another, a chain of human errors and just terrible luck that set the stage for the final disaster. This is where the bad luck just starts piling up. A delay causes a last-minute crew change. In all the confusion, an officer who gets reassigned walks off the ship, and he accidentally takes the key for the locker where the lookout's binoculars are stored. Then, throughout the day of the disaster, the ship gets not 1, not 2, but 6 separate warnings about icebergs. The very last one was the most direct, coming from a ship that was literally stopped in the ice just a few miles away. And this was the response to that final critical warning. You see, the radio operators didn't actually work for the shipping line. They worked for Marconi. They made their money sending private messages for the wealthy passengers. So when that warning from the SS Californian came in, the radio operator, Jack Phillips, was swamped with a backlog of telegrams. He basically told them to get lost, a message that could have saved everyone. And as if all that wasn't enough, the conditions that night were a uniquely deadly cocktail. There was no moon, so it was pitch black. The ocean was weirdly calm, which sounds nice, but it meant there were no waves breaking against the base of the iceberg, which would have made it easier to spot. And to top it all off, a strange optical illusion caused by the cold air, a kind of cold water mirage, helped camouflage the iceberg against the horizon. Okay, so the stage is set. You've got a flawed ship, a comedy of errors, and impossibly bad luck. Now we get to the final moments. The 37 seconds between the lookout spotting the iceberg and the fatal impact. The ship was moving fast, about 41 kilometers per hour, which is close to its top speed. Now, that wasn't unusual for the time, but it was way too fast for an area where they'd been warned about ice. At that speed, they needed almost a kilometer to come to a stop. The lookouts, squinting into the darkness with no binoculars, spotted the iceberg just 274 meters away.
They had no time. They were completely out of options. So the most critical decision was made in those final 37 seconds. The officer on duty gave the order to turn the ship hard and reverse the engines. But here's the tragic irony. The better move would have been to hit it head on. The bow was the strongest part of the ship. It would have crumpled, for sure, floating 2 or 3 compartments. The ship would have been badly damaged, but it almost certainly would have stayed afloat. Instead, by turning, they exposed the ship's side. The underwater part of the iceberg just scraped right along the hull, popping those weak iron rivets one after another like a zipper. And that scrape opened up not 1, not 2, but 5 watertight compartments. Remember, the unsinkable ship was only designed to survive 4. As those first 5 compartments filled up, the bow got pulled down deeper and deeper until the water started spilling over the tops of those low compartment walls, flowing into the next compartment and then the next. It was a chain reaction, and it sealed the ship's fate. And just when you think the tragedy couldn't get any worse, during the absolute chaos of the evacuation, the captain's order of women and children first was misinterpreted by some of his officers. They heard women and children only. So they were refusing to let men into the lifeboats even when there was plenty of empty space. Lifeboats were being launched half full while hundreds of people were left behind on the deck. The story of the Titanic is just one of unimaginable loss. It's truly heartbreaking. But from that awful tragedy, some crucial lessons were learned that completely changed the rules for sea travel forever. So, to wrap it all up, the Titanic didn't sink because of one single thing. It sank because of everything. It was a total system failure. Flaws in the design, weak materials, outdated regulations, a whole string of human mistakes, and just a dose of unbelievably bad luck all came together on that one single night in the middle of the Atlantic. But the legacy of the disaster was swift and massive. The International Ice Patrol was created to track icebergs so this would never happen again. New laws were passed that required a 24/7 radio watch on all passenger ships. And, most importantly, the rules were totally rewritten to demand that every single ship carry enough lifeboats for every person on board. These changes, born from tragedy, have saved countless lives over the last century. When you get right down to it, the Titanic is a powerful cautionary tale. It's about hubris, about being so overconfident in your technology that you think you're invincible. And it really makes you wonder, doesn't it? Over a century later, as we keep pushing the boundaries of technology, have we really truly learned that lesson?